Welcome to this special bonus episode of the Passive House Podcast. I'm Zach Semke, Director of Passive House Accelerator, and we're pleased to be sharing a series of bonus episodes recorded at PhiusCon 2022 in Chicago. These interviews were made possible by generous support from Corp and Zola Windows. In this interview, Passive House Accelerator's Director of Publications, Mary James, interviews Julie Klump of POAH, or Preservation of Affordable Housing.
Welcome, Julie Klump, to the Passive House Accelerator podcast at the Phius conference. And you are the VP of Design and Building Performance for the Preservation of Affordable Housing. I'm very excited to talk with you because I know you do a lot of retrofit work, one of my favorite topics. And one of the really interesting projects to me that you've been working on has been your involvement with the Realize project program, which I wrote about back in 2021. Can you tell us a little bit about that project you've been working with?
Sure. The bigger rehab we're doing in place, building on site, is right next to another property of ours. It's a much smaller brick building, very nondescript, and it's one of 4 buildings that are similar construction, similar systems. When I gave a tour of the bigger building to Tim McDonald and RMI, he kind of got the idea that maybe that would be a good set of buildings to analyze for prefab overcladding systems with mechanicals in the outboard stud cavity. So we put a team together, mechanical engineer and commissioning agent.
Sorry, can I stop you and
sure.
just ask you to talk briefly about the preservation of affordable housing, what your organization...
Oh, sure.
How many properties you actually own?
Sure.
Because you don't just design and build buildings, your organization owns them.
Yeah, we own and manage and develop. We have 12,000 units in 11 states and DC, and we rarely sell a project. We buy new, or we build new, we buy existing, and the goal is always just to preserve the affordability.
So this current project is based where? That you were just starting to talk about?
Salem, Massachusetts. So it's north of Boston. And the way we fund the projects is typically through a low-income housing tax credit allocation. And then there's, there might be mortgage money, there might be some other sources of funds. And so the Fairweathers project, which is the Realize project, we're doing a rehab, very modest rehab with a financing program through HUD that's more like bringing up the ADA units to current code, making sure the life safety components are all up to date, elevator modernization. And so we took that opportunity to upgrade the electric service so that if we got an opportunity to do a Realize project or even just get to all electric in some way, we would have the capacity. So that's part of that rehab. And then the feasibility study that we're doing, there's a possibility that we could find the funds for it. Our next step is to do kind of a financial model to see how much debt we could leverage. And then if there's a gap, there's so many funding sources out there that we might be able to fill that gap with some kind of incentive or grant from somebody and do one of the 4 buildings as a pilot.
And with this feasibility, you're looking at a deep energy retrofit?
Yes. So it would be complete overcladding. We wanted to see, because we had a building right next door that the materials were coming to the site and being installed on the site. We wanted to compare doing that and the cost of that building versus building something in a factory, studs, sheathing, insulation, windows, maybe even some of the siding, and then we drop those in and residents can stay in place and then a very minimal disruption where we go into the unit, pull the old window out, and do a connection to the new window. The relocation costs at our larger project, which is two 10-story towers, 281 units, was expensive and disruptive. Even though we created hotel suites within the building, 2 on each floor, a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom, so that the way we approached the building was more driven by the exterior. So we had giant mast climbers that went up and down the building to take the brick off, to put the new sheathing on, to put the metal panels, to put the windows in, and those masts kind of covered 2 units. And so we did it 2 units at a time, per floor, 2 stacks at a time. So residents would move into those hotel suites on their floor, so they weren't changing floor, they weren't changing unit size. We spruced those hotel units up before anybody moved in, but people just kept coming in and out of those as their unit was worked on. But that involved a consultant that had 3 or 4 people, maybe up to 5 people, that hired movers, that handled all the communication for us. Because you have to move somebody, because of the work we were doing was so extensive, hazardous material, we had to contain the units in order to remove sheetrock. So it cost us $1 million for the relocation efforts at the 2 towers. And before COVID, we would do occupied rehab because we could create a hospitality suite where people could be during the day, but then they could go back to their unit at night. And the GC was always responsible for a functioning bathroom and a kitchen sink. But then when COVID hit, it seemed to make a lot less sense to have a resident out for the day and have a lot of different people coming and going out of their unit. So we started creating these hotel suites on site. And so that's, we lose some rent on that. We, because those 2 units become vacant for the duration of the project.
Wow, that sounds really complicated and to coordinate and expensive, but also how are you going to get around it?
Yeah.
Unless you could do the retrofit so quickly that you don't need to actually move somebody out.
Yeah, and housing is pretty in short supply everywhere, but in Massachusetts it seems real short supply. And we don't want kids to have to be bused to their school. So trying to if we had to relocate off-site, trying to find housing for 281 families would have been probably impossible.
Right. So the feasibility study, are you in the middle of conducting that, or did you finish that?
They finished the study. We had a GC that helped us price it. Tim McDonald sort of led the effort. He met with researched companies that had fiberglass studs, that would be, that we could build a wall out of. He talked to Metal Eve. They do kind of custom metal studs. What steps we would have to take? Should we put the mechanical equipment in that outboard stud cavity, or should we try to figure out a unitized system that could just, per unit come in and out of the enclosure and manage it that way? So we went through many mechanical system options, what it would cost, what it would take to put in, and we came up with 4 scenarios that we priced. And one of the scenarios was even partial factory-built panels and partial in the field panels. And so there's some cost information.
Were there any clear winners?
There was a clear winner, and it. In terms of cost, and we haven't, in trying to compare it to Salem Heights, we haven't factored in the $1 million relocation costs to that. But the next step is to kind of do a financial model and see how we might tackle one of those, or all of them.
Well, sounds like as you figure this out, you have a lot of other units that it could possibly be applied to if you come up with.
So before the conference, I went through our portfolio, and I found at least one building, if not 10 buildings. In each state we own buildings, properties, and found buildings that would be perfectly suitable.
Wow.
Sort of boxy, nondescript, no historic features, that could all look a lot better with an overcladding, perform better with an overcladding, and from here to Florida, there lots of opportunities to do that. And some of the buildings, maybe not the front elevation, because in Chicago, a lot of the buildings we have beautiful front decorative facades, but the back and the sides,
not so much.
right? And we can make a huge dent in those elevations. So there, and we're one developer of many. So I think this could be, whether it's done in the field or done in a factory, it would be one way to really ramp up the deep energy retrofits that we need to do.
Yeah, that would be truly exciting. And would you be targeting Passive House for these deep
Yes.
energy retrofits?
Yep.
Yeah.
And we're targeting Passive House for our 2-tower rehab. And what we've done on that project is, and I'll talk about this on Friday, is that we went through every metric that we would have to pass, and we've identified the ones that we will take care of. Air tightness of the enclosure, but we can't touch the slab because it would be impossible. Compartmentalization, it becomes really tricky, but there are a lot of the metrics that we can check off that we would easily certify as Passive House. Or I'm not going to say easily, but we have a garage.
With reasonable effort.
Yeah, we've got a garage ceiling that we're insulating, that we're trying to, really wrap and make airtight. Probably can't afford to wrap all the slab edge, that I would like to do. But the compartmentalization, one thing we did when we did the testing is we identified every location. And even if we're not touching that during the rehab, we're going to make a checklist so that when they do a unit turn, then they touch the cabinets or they touch the flooring, or they can hit some of those holes.
Great. Well, that's exciting, and I look forward to hearing your talk tomorrow and getting to hear more about it. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Of course. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.